Why does Gen X have such a profound distrust of politics? I mean, is it just our baseless cynicism, or is it a product of the times that we lived through? I mean, it's definitely a conundrum indeed. I mean, when you look at it and you try and unravel it, it's like a Gordian knot. So let's take a look and see what we can come up with. So I'm not always repeating myself. Us Xers, we know when we were born. Everybody else, you gotta know by now. If you don't, I'll break it down for you and do a video on what era each generation is and their age range. But as a reality, we have a unique perspective on politics. I mean, we're often pigeonholed as skeptical, cynical. I mean, but for good reason. Because it's not to say that we're a bunch of grumpy old cynics and we're just shaking our fists at the world now. I mean, far from it. I mean, rather, our distrust of the system stems from a deeply ingrained skepticism, one that was truly molded and shaped by the events that we lived through. Imagine growing up in the shadow of the Cold War. You know, you're always on the edge of your seat waiting for that nuclear shoe to drop. I mean, you've seen the walls fall, literally and metaphorically. I mean, and we watched this world transformed in just the blink of an eye, literally overnight, in a single day. I mean, we witnessed the advent of the globalization movement and the digital revolution. I mean, and we've seen how it's a double-edged sword that seems to be wielded. So we've watched as the politicians' promises turned into more political scandals, leaders rise, leaders fall, sometimes in the same breath, a single leader. So our skepticism is not without foundation. I mean, we're born witness to the systemic shifts in the political landscape. It's undeniable. From the ideological ideas of the Cold War to the emergence of the information age. I mean, we've seen the chasm between political promise and reality widen and just grow as time goes on. So we're all too familiar with the political spin cycle, something that younger generations just don't seem to quite understand yet. I mean, our cynicism, then, you know, it's not born of baseless mistrust, but of a keen understanding of the realities of politics and what really goes on. So is our distrust justified? I mean, it's a matter of perspective, but I sure seem to think so. I mean, the world of politics, it's complex, it's often murky, and it's easy to become disillusioned with it. It's also the realm of power and influence where change is actually possible, where you can get in and make a difference, and where voices can be heard. But it's a delicate balance, and one that Gen X ourselves, we're still navigating and learning. So the younger generations understand. You don't know it all yet. I mean, to fully understand this, we have to look in the past and examine the events that shaped our generation's political landscape. I mean, after all, to comprehend what goes on now in the present, you must understand the past. Our formative years were filled with significant political events and societal changes, which definitely, inevitably shaped our views of the world. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, the world in a constant state of flux. The Cold War was winding down, you know, but definitely not without leaving that permanent mark on the world. I mean, the tension, the constant threat of nuclear war, the ideological clash. I mean, it was all part of daily life for us. And it was all during our tender years. And let's not forget, this was also the time that neoliberalism was on the rise. The world was shifting from post-war consensus to a new economic order, and where market forces were to be the guiding principles of everything. And definitely what a change it was. The promise of the prosperity, the allure of individual freedoms, the dismantling of the welfare state. I mean, it was a heady mix. And yet the reality turned out to be quite different. I mean, economic inequality widened, job security dwindled, and the social safety net that was once taken for granted started to unravel. Now imagine growing up in this world. I mean, we witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of a complete era. I mean, we've seen the promises of the neoliberalism fall flat. We've seen the leaders, the ones that were supposed to guide society, fail to deliver on their promises. I mean, so how could you not question the system and the politics that they were putting out there? And then if that wasn't enough, you know, along came the digital age. I mean, this internet, the great equalizer, we thought, the tool of freedom, but it also became a tool for them to use to mass manipulation and surveillance. I mean, it was information overload right off the bat. You started right away. You had fake news. There were the new privacy concerns. It was a whole new world, and it definitely not necessarily was for the better. I mean, these events, these shifts that we had, were not just historical footnotes. They were real life experiences that were lived by us that are still here. And they shaped our view, the view of this entire generation. And how could that not leave a mark? I mean, how could it not shape your political view, the skepticism and the distrust with all the failures and lies that we saw? So all these events combined with the rapidly changing society, I mean, it definitely had a deep imprint on our political views. So from this turbulent past that we lived in, I mean, arose this somewhat nihilistic view of politics. I mean, but where did it actually stem from in the beginning? And I mean, is it justified? I mean, consider the world in which we came of age, okay? Our generation, we grew up in this economic stability and the Cold War and this general shape of uncertainty, the sense that everything was completely unstable. I mean, we were handed a world full of problems and told that we have to solve them. I mean, often with limited resources and no supports. So is it any wonder then that we have developed this somewhat majorly cynical view of politics and politicians? I mean, we witnessed firsthand how the political decisions that led to the financial crisis, war, and social unrest, I mean, we've seen the promises made, broken, watched as the gap between the haves and the have not continued to widen. So the disillusionment and the feeling of frustration, it's not just a reaction to what we've observed, but it's a result of feeling unheard and unrepresented. I mean, we watched as politicians seemingly pandered to the whims, to the loudest voices, overlooking the needs and concerns of the average citizen. I mean, oh my God, look, it's happening again today. But is our nihilistic view justified? I mean, it's kind of a complex question. I mean, on one hand, our experiences, they gave us these reasons to be skeptical. You know, we've seen the shortcomings of the political system, the corruption, the ineffectiveness, and we've seen the politicians who seem more concerned with maintaining power than serving the people, which you have to say is almost 99% of them. And on the other hand, this perspective can lead to a sense of hopelessness, the feeling that change is impossible. And it can be paralyzing. I mean, it can prevent people from participating in the political process, and from using their voices, and from thinking your vote can affect change. I mean, I think for a while, our generation had the least, probably the smallest voter turnout for the longest time. Some places, vote turnouts got so low, they started questioning whether to have elections. And you can't forget, you know, I've said it before and I say it again, our generation witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of apartheid in South Africa, the rise of the internet. I mean, we've seen change that is possible and that progress can be made, but our distrust might seem extreme to some. Given our experiences, one might argue that it's not entirely unfounded or justified. This deep-seated distrust is definitely and arguably created a political void. I mean, so what does that mean? I mean, this political void I'm talking about, it's not a simple black hole where all interest in politics has been sucked away. No, it's more of a chasm, that yawning gap between Gen X and the political establishment. I mean, this gap, it stemmed from our disillusionment with the politics, a belief that the system was fundamentally flawed and broken from the beginning, and engaging with it, at best, was a waste of our time, and at worst meant we were endorsing its failings and the corruption. But in practice, what does this void look like? I mean, it's epitomized by a lack of political participation. Voting rates amongst Xers, I mean, they were lower than those of other generations. And not that we don't care about issues, we just didn't believe that casting a vote made a difference. And I mean, and who could blame us? When we watch scandal after scandal unfold and then seen the politicians break promise after promise and serve their interests instead of the public's, it's hard to keep faith in a system. I mean, the political void also manifests itself in a disengagement from traditional party politics. I mean, Gen X were more likely to identify as independents. I mean, we don't buy into the binary choices of the left or right in politics. We're not interested in the tribalism, in the us versus them mentality. I mean, we're so disillusioned with the whole circus, we'd rather stay on the sidelines than join in. But here's the rub. That void, this disengagement, it's not good for democracy. A healthy democracy relies on the active participation of its citizens. It's a bit like a sports team. I mean, if half the players decide not to play anymore, the game falls apart. And so it goes with Gen X. Reasons for stepping back from the field are understandable, but our absence was felt. So while this void is concerning, it's not entirely without hope. I mean, the very fact that Gen X, we care about these issues, our disillusionment aside, because, we want better, means there's the possibility for potential change. And maybe, just maybe, we can be the ones to finally bring about it. I mean, we've stepped up. We're now participating. It's now time for us to make it better. So as we move forward now in this future, does Gen X, do we identify with a specific way of political thinking? Well, it's a bit like asking a cat if they prefer a type of mouse. I mean, sure, they might have their preferences, but by the end of the day, a mouse is a mouse. And politics, well, I mean, you get the point, right? Gen X, I mean, we're lovely folks, but we don't necessarily gravitate toward a single political ideology. I mean, we're an extremely diverse bunch, even though we are the smallest of generations. I mean, but we do share is our common thread of skepticism. It's not that we're adverse to the political engagement. I mean, instead, we often perceive politics as something, it's a rigged game, okay? Where the house always wins and the common folk, we're left to pick up the crumbs and fend for ourselves. But then soon as you start getting ahead, they beat you down because they can't have the common folk really getting involved in making true decisions. So now we're at the $1 million question. How do we bridge this political void? How do we re-engage our group of people who have, quite understandably, we've become so disillusioned with the political landscape that even today, now that we're starting to take over, we still have a low rate of participation. So firstly, we must not acknowledge our own skepticism, but we can't pretend that it's unfounded. A healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing, especially when it comes to politics. I mean, it keeps us on our toes and it stops you from being blindsided with the lies all the time. And then next, I mean, political institutions and the politicians, you definitely have to earn our trust. And now that we're going into these things, we need to prove we can be trusted, really trusted. I mean, it's not an overnight fix. I know it requires transparency, honesty, and a commitment to serving the people rather than your own personal interests. Everything a politician is absolutely actually against. And then lastly, that we must sure that the voices of not just Gen X, but everybody are heard. I mean, but Gen X ourselves, we have this invaluable life experience and insight right now that'll greatly contribute to the political discourse. And our engagement won't be just beneficial now. It's absolutely essential before it gets too crazy. So I got to sum it up here by saying that political skepticism is not a brick wall. It's just a hurdle. And with the right approach, it's a hurdle that you can overcome. We can overcome. I can overcome. I mean, our distrust of politics is so deeply rooted. Understanding it is our first step toward bridging this gap and fostering a more engaged political climate, not this gong show that is in existence today. But that is it. I'm done with this. I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. So this is Drac saying goodbye, so long, enjoy, have a great weekend. It's been a fabulous year. It's going to be a great new year. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace out, everybody.